Hello, art fans, and welcome to the very first Artisan podcast. Today, we have a very talented multimedia artist by the name of Damon Locks. He is currently an artist in residence at the Hyde Park Art Center, and he was kind enough to allow me to visit him there and record this podcast. Let us jump right in and get to know him a little bit.
So where are you from?
Originally, I'm from Silver Spring, Maryland, right outside Washington, D.C. But I've been here in Chicago since the late 80s.
What made you move to Chicago?
The Art Institute. I transferred schools.
Okay, what were you studying there?
Well, the cool thing is that when I was at School of Visual Arts in New York, I was an illustration major, and I didn't have to declare a major at the Art Institute, so I was able to take a whole bunch of different things. So I took all kinds of stuff, but I found that I really liked printmaking, so I got really heavily into printmaking.
Now, when you say you didn't have to declare a major, you just had to take a bunch of classes that would equal up to a degree, or is
well,
that how
I
it
was
worked?
getting a Bachelor of Fine Arts.
Okay.
And so I guess they just I don't know how they arranged it, but
Right.
I didn't have to take, like, I was an illustration major, but to get the Bachelor of Fine Arts here, I just had to like go through and get X amount of credits, so I had to add up the credits, you know.
Okay.
So I was able to take different classes.
No doubt, I can dig that. So you said you were at the University of New York, or
And I was at School of Visual Arts in New York.
okay, what was that like?
New York was a cool place to go to in the 80s because New York was different than it is now. Like New York, like there's a film called Escape from New York, right? Great film. I highly recommend it. It was made in the early 80s. But in the late 80s, it still seemed like New York was going to become chaos. Like in the
Okay.
film Escape from New York gets closed off and just turned into a prison.
Right.
And New York still felt like all the parts were like seedy and all stuff was still covered in graffiti, trains and stuff like that.
Right.
And you're like, we're not coming back from this.
Yeah.
You know? And
Yeah.
so it was an interesting time to be there. And I also went to school with some like kids of famous like fantasy artists, like Boris Vallejo is a famous
Nice.
fantasy artist. His son was in my classes, and this guy Neil Adams, who's a comic book artist, his son was in one of my classes. So that was cool, you know. But the SVA program, well, not as much the program. I had this really fantastic drawing teacher that like changed my life in terms of how to see things, you know. But for the most part, I've still felt like I was one of the best artists in the. I shouldn't say that. I just felt like I wasn't challenged enough, and then someone had a good friend of mine, a woman named Sue-Ann, had come out here, and she was like, "You should come to this school," and I was like, "Sue-Ann's cool. I'd like to hang out with her."
Right,
We'll
right.
I'll
No
go to
doubt.
that school, yeah.
So, like you being from the Northeast, most people I know from the Northeast, I feel like New York is the place where they want to be at. You know, they all kind of gravitate there for either the music, for the art, for just it being the metropolitan center of the United States. I find it interesting that you wanted to get out of there, especially during at that time, because I know in the 80s, you had like really hit movies come out like Breakin' and B Street, and I felt like, at least being from Chicago myself, that was kind of the epicenter of, you know, the hip hop phenomenon, the breakdancing phenomenon, the street art, you know, all of that. It seemed like that would be the place to be, but the fact that you wanted to leave, I find that pretty interesting. Would you say that those things are true about just the culture in New York at that particular time?
Yeah, I mean, New York is a cool place. There's no doubt about it, you know. But I think one of my problems was that it was a little too intense in terms of like it was too constant. There was like too many people. It was just kind of a constant intensity that
Sure.
I needed some space, you know. Like the metaphor that I use is, and it still applies. Like when I go to New York, I am interested in. When I'm in New York and I'm walking down the street, I'm always looking ahead of myself,
Right.
and being like, well, how can I pass this person? Oh, this light's going to change. I can scoot by them.
Right,
and get
right,
ahead,
right, right.
So that's just how you have to operate, kind of, you know. But when I'm in Chicago and I'm walking down the street, I'm just walking down the street.
I can dig that.
You see what I'm saying?
I
So
can
I
dig
just
that.
needed some space to walk down the street. Like at 2:00 in the morning in Chicago, I can get on my bike and ride down the street.
Absolutely.
There's no, there's
nobody, man.
Right.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen in New York. You know, it's
That's
like
amazing.
it's open all night.
Right.
So I just needed some space.
I can totally understand that, man. That's crazy. So when you moved here to Chicago and you started to study at the Art Institute, what was your initial reactions of leaving a big city and coming to the big city in the Midwest anyway?
Well, I have to say that in reality, I'd never thought about like being in Illinois. Like I was a little struck by it. I was like, I moved to Illinois? That's weird. I never even thought about Illinois.
Yeah,
you know?
no doubt.
But what I did find is that Chicago was a place, especially in art school, where people from all over the Midwest needed to get out of their small towns, and they came to Chicago.
Exactly.
And so when I got to Chicago, I found like all these weird, interesting people that were all from Middle America that needed to like find other people from that kind of weird tribe.
No doubt.
So when I got here, I was like, oh, this is great, because it was just a bunch of weirdos.
You know, a bunch of Midwest weirdos.
Yeah.
That's true. In Chicago, you get a lot of people from like Iowa, a ton of people from Michigan. I swear to God, like everybody that moves from Michigan comes to Chicago.
Right.
It feels that way anyway. A lot of people from Northwest Indiana. I mean, it's a quick drive over here. A lot of people from St. Louis, quite a few people from like Kentucky or even Ohio that come over to Chicago, and they kind of get here and they just never leave because, like you say, there's a draw of leaving your hometown and coming to a place like Chicago, which is the metropolitan epicenter of the Midwest. You know, you really have to get probably to Atlanta, Houston, you know, is the closest place in the South. And like we already talked about New York, and you have to go all the way as far west as maybe Vegas, or maybe not even Vegas, but really LA before you get to anything quite like this. And I think in Chicago, when you look at the lay of the city and you look at the people and how diverse the population is, Chicago's probably more artsy than any of those places. This is probably the artsiest city that I've ever been to, in America anyway, and I find that to be pretty interesting. So I noticed that with most artists, we all kind of get into art on some level as a child. I mean, that's probably true for most children. What are your earliest childhood memories of you being interested in art, whether it had been music, you know, the visual arts? Like, what sparked that for you?
Well, there's a super concrete answer to that. Like, I always drew, but I kind of drew because I was, like, interested in drawing, whether it was, like, I remember super early days, I remember doing this, like, big rabbit battle war scene that was like folded out paper, and we would tape paper together and just continue drawing these battles, right? But I went to like a little store, like a drugstore, right? And found one of those racks with the comic books in them. And I was 10 years old, and I picked up this comic, and it was an X-Men comic, issue 111. And there's an artist named John Byrne who drew that.
Super famous.
Yeah, and it changed my life. Like I bought this comic, and I was like, this is incredible. Like I've never seen artwork like this. And I was like, what have I been doing my whole life that I haven't known about that? I was 10 years old, you know, of course.
Right.
And I became a huge fan of comic books from that moment on. And that artist, John Byrne, was someone that, like, as a child, I emulated. Like, I tried to draw just like him. I tried to change my signature so it looked like him.
No doubt.
I ordered How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, which was a great book, actually. I highly recommend it for everybody, about drawing and composition and things like that. But I just, like, became consumed with comics, so I read all the time. But art was always the focus of the comic. Like, if the comic had good art, I would buy it. And I didn't care if, like, most of the time for me, good art went with good story.
Yeah.
And bad art and good story just wasn't good enough for me to read. Yeah, so that was I thought I was going to be a comic book artist when I was a little kid. And I never became a comic book artist, but it was a really great launching pad for me to start drawing.
I can dig that. I know for me, myself personally, I think, well, maybe every little boy gets fascinated with comic books. You know, for whatever reason, whether it's the colors, maybe it's the heroic acts of the characters themselves, the coolness of having a comic book in your hand. You know, there's something about that. Like, oh man, there's this book, and you don't really think of it as a book, but it's this artwork that's contained, and it's not long, so it's easily digestible. The stories aren't too dense. There's action happening. And I know growing up in the 90s, a lot of those comic books were cartoons at the time. Mm-hmm. So I was a huge X-Men guy myself, like huge. There was an animated series for X-Men. There was an animated series for Batman. There was an animated series for Superman. There was an animated series for Iron Man, the Hulk. There was just a bunch of them. So I was able to read comic books and watch the cartoons, which gave me just this huge palette of art that I was able to take in as well. And I find it interesting that the X-Men comics are what kind of initially drew you in, because I think that's true for a lot of us. I don't know what changes, but I feel like we all kind of get into it a little bit differently. We'll come out of it a little bit differently. But I think it affects us really deeply, and I think we don't really realize that early on.
Well, I also hope that, I agree with you, like little boys in comics, but I think that hopefully times have changed, and that young people of whatever gender would be interested in comics
no doubt.
now, because there used to be basically a little boys club.
Absolutely, no doubt. So, like trading cards,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully that's expanded now, and I still go to comic book stores, and I see that has changed, and plus, like the Wonder Woman movie also.
Oh my God!
Thankfully opened that up to a whole new generation of young people, so they can appreciate all types of characters.
Absolutely, that's a very poignant point you bring up. The boys club. I've had these conversations with several of my guy friends, female friends. You're right. It's kind of there's a stigma that girls aren't supposed to like comics, and like you say, that is really changing. You can maybe attribute that to the feminist movement. Maybe you can just attribute it to there's the internet, and girls can have access to things without their mom having approval of it. Maybe it's just a new generation of parents that just grow up a little bit more liberal, and you can play with Barbies and you can enjoy comic books without fearing that your daughter is going to be attracted to quote-unquote masculine things. And that Wonder Woman movie, I saw it for the first time maybe 3 weeks ago, and that movie is phenomenal. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. It was just a good movie that had a great female lead in it, and I'm really glad that movie happened. I hope another one comes out, because DC has kind of been missing the mark some of the time with that movie.
Almost all the time.
Yeah.
Almost all the
time.
Yeah. I mean, like the Chris Nolan Batmans were
phenomenal.
Yeah, well, I think that they kind of got worse. No, I think the Joker one was the best.
The pinnacle,
one,
yeah.
And then the Bane one was a mess, I thought. But anyway,
yeah.
The rest of the DC cinematic universe is just a mess.
Yeah.
So Wonder Woman, I missed it. I've been meaning to see it, but I missed it because it was just super busy time. But I was glad that they knocked it out the park with that one.
Yeah, man, check it out when you get a chance. It really is good. Before we move on, I got a theory about the Batman movies. I think too. I've rewatched the Dark Knight Rises probably 3 or 4 times, because the first time I saw it, I was underwhelmed. I'm not gonna lie.
Right, that's the Bane one, right?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the Bane one. 2 was so good. The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
Was so good.
Heath Ledger,
yeah. Yeah. Anything that came after that was gonna be a letdown. Could 3 have been better? Yes, it could have been better. But I feel like whatever came after that movie, the Christian Bale played the movie so well. Heath Ledger, that was one of the greatest acting performances, I think we can agree, in any movie, any time, period, regardless of genre. I don't know that movie could have stood up to it, because it was just that damn good, So that's just my little theory on it. Could it have been better? Absolutely. But 2 was just one of the best movies I'd ever seen.
Well, before we leave that,
yeah,
let me just say I have some critiques of that film, because it's been a while since I saw it, but since you saw it a couple times, maybe you can work with me. But one of the things I had a problem with was that I felt like Christopher Nolan was using kind of contemporary visuals of like the Occupy movement that was happening at the time, right? And so Bane and I can't remember his co-enemy's name, the woman that was in the was it Ra's al Ghul's daughter?
I think she was supposed to be Talia al Ghul.
Yeah, yes, right.
But I don't know that that's actually who she was in the movie. I don't think she called herself that.
Right, but I think that's who it was, right? So anyway, they preach this revolution thing,
Absolutely.
right? You even saw like people like dragging rich people out of their homes
Yes.
and things like that, right?
Yes.
But what I think was kind of problematic with that film is you use this revolution thing, right? You use the trope of revolution,
Right.
right? But in reality, the two people that were in charge had a different agenda, right?
Yes.
And then at the end of the film, like not during this film, they flipped this whole thing, and which I think the message that was sending was really strange and disturbing, where the police became the rebels. You know,
They did.
and
yeah.
then also we were through the narrative of the story, we were made to feel that we wanted to reestablish law and order
Yes.
with a rich white dude who's the
Right.
Batman coming
Right.
back
Right.
and then helping the police
Right.
escape. You know, so
Yeah.
at the end
Yeah.
of the thing, the police get out and they're face to face. The people that they're face to face with looked exactly like the Occupy protesters. They had like masks on and blah
Sure.
blah blah. And I was like, this is a super weird message, because at first you're like, oh, revolution, blah blah
Yes.
blah. But then the revolution was fake, and then you end up cheering for the police
Yes.
and the establishment to take back
Yeah.
charge.
No
so
doubt.
at the end, you're like, yay!
Yeah.
The government
Yeah,
and
that's
the police
interesting.
and the rich guy
Right.
are back in place. Thank goodness.
Right.
Yeah.
They definitely hit us with the okie doke there. I never thought about it that way. Because I guess, you know, on some level, a lot of us, really, I'll say really non-rich people, we all kind of envision some sort of revolution in our minds. Well, I don't want to say everybody, because some people just like getting up and doing what they do every day because they enjoy the security of like normality. Whatever that is, they do enjoy that. But for others, I know that we do think of changing things radically because we see how messed up things are. And like you said, which is a really great point, the people who came to liberate us actually they enslaved us in a way. They locked us into this very confined space. They began to ration us food. You know, and then they had the nuclear bomb around the city that they knew would expire in time, after a certain amount of time, and would explode and kill everybody in the city.
Right.
So it has like this weird kind of Nazi feel where they came and preached this, we're going to bring change,
Right.
we're going to kick out all of the Jews, we're going to kick out all of the rich people, we're going to turn the city back over into your hands. And they came with their guns, they kicked out all the police, and then they end up becoming the captors of the city, only to lead them to doom. And like you say, the rich white guy, industrialist, who gave up everything to sort of do the same thing that they were doing, just in a different type of way, ends up helping the police and getting them back to restore normalcy, which is weird. That's peculiar, man. I never really thought about it like that. That's deep as hell. Damn, I'm glad you brought that up, man. That's cool.
Okay, one last thing, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
You can edit this however you
No,
want.
no. We're gonna keep this.
When Bruce Wayne or Batman gets put into the prison,
Yeah.
that was supposed to be like the most difficult prison of all time,
Sure.
blah, 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 and he's got to climb up the thing,
Yeah.
right? I swear, that was the most supportive prison I've ever seen.
It
Like,
was.
someone helped heal him.
Yeah.
And then every time he tried to climb
Yeah.
out, people were like, go, go,
They were
go,
cheering
go.
for him. Yeah.
I was like, this prison is not tough. They were like all really supportive of
Yeah,
him.
they were, man.
Yeah.
They were. It was definitely like a pro-escape prison. I think there was only a couple fights in there.
Yeah.
I expected everybody to just be dying. You know what I mean?
Right. You're like, this is a tough prison. I'm like, it doesn't seem that tough. It seems like everyone wants to help you escape.
Yeah, and it was literally just like a hole in the ground.
Yeah, right.
Like, how were they getting food? They were just lowering food down, like
Well,
through a basket or something like that.
When he finally climbs up the hole, he's in the middle of the desert somewhere, you know?
Yeah.
And then the next time you see him, he's at Gotham City. And I
Yeah.
was like, how did he, with no resources, how did he get from
I have no
there?
idea,
Yeah,
man.
okay.
And, you know what? I don't know how he knew where he was.
How did
Yeah.
Catwoman get into the barricade city also?
That's a good question.
You're in the
Maybe
middle.
she never left, man.
You're like you're out in the desert somewhere, and then you are back at Gotham City magically. Okay.
Well, he's Batman. I guess When you have $1 billion, you can figure anything
Yeah,
out,
but he didn't have his wallet with him.
Maybe he just had to say, I'm Bruce Wayne.
Right, they're like,
you
okay,
know, maybe
cool.
that's what it is. Oh, Will, we got you, bro.
Yeah.
We'll let you
Yeah.
in. You know, I don't know. Rich people live a different life than we do. All right, so getting back on track, man. That was a great little segue. All right, so when did you decide that art was going to be the thing that you were going to do?
Well, I think that the art decided for me, you know. I got heavily into music as a teenager.
Okay.
And so I got super into music and started playing in like punk bands and just making music myself. And, you know, my record once I discovered, well, punk music, because it was like the early 80s.
Sure.
And it was also, DC had a thriving like hardcore punk scene in it, right? So I was going to see live shows. So with that, this is like really long time ago. So all of this was super new. So I was seeing this scene that was happening and unfolding way before MTV existed, and or was showing anything.
Right.
So I was kind of excited by this whole new medium that had like fashion and all this other art. The record covers were beautiful and interesting. People were making flyers and making their own record covers. So my dream started to be like, I want to make record covers. I want to be in music. So I think that introduced this kind of like multidisciplinary kind of multimedia kind of aspect to my life. But art was always a thing, and I knew I was going to go to art school, so I ended up going to art school, and probably after art school, music kind of started to take a little forefront to the visuals, because I got in a band, and I was touring all over the country, doing stuff and doing record covers and learning how to do, I remember like, I used to go to a designer with my ideas to do the record covers, because computers were in. Like I was starting to do stuff on the tail end of when people were doing regular layout design, and then computers were new. So I used to sit next to a guy at a computer and be like, make this happen, do this. You know? But for a long time, my art would be something that I did on the side of my being in a band and having a job. But at the same time, I was doing sound at the museum, the Field Museum of Natural History. I was doing, in the early 90s, I was, when you push a button and hear like a vocalization of an animal, like I had gotten that sound and transferred it to a digital chip and installed it in the exhibition. Or if you walked into an area and you heard like frogs and water, rain and stuff like that, those are the kind of things I was doing. So I was starting to mess around with sound, like environments, and making those things, being experimental with sound. But probably around, I was working at record stores. I was working at the Field Museum. I was working at record labels. I started working at a recording studio. I eventually became a music publicist, which is the person that kind of sets up interviews and photo shoots for people. And that like transitioned to like the internet and like emailing and blah blah blah. But and at a certain point, being a music publicist just wasn't for me. And so I was not happy doing that anymore, and I needed a change. And I said, well, I've been doing art on the side for all this time. It's just every once in a while I'll do like a record cover, or I'll do something for a magazine or whatever. And I was like, I need to put this to the forefront. So I quit my job without like any kind of like safety net. Just quit my job and said, okay, time to figure it out. Time to figure out how to be an artist and what happens when you do that. You know?
No doubt.
And that's when the economy fell apart in 2007.
So
it was a really terrible time to quit your job.
No doubt.
And it's the last 10 years have been this like interesting journey of how to put art to the forefront.
I can dig that, man. You said a couple interesting things. I didn't know you were in a band. What instrument did you play?
I was always a vocalist in the group.
Cool.
In Trenchmouth, which was the name of this band I was in for 8 years, 7 or 8 years, I can't remember. I was a vocalist, but I also played like percussion. So we were kind of a percussive punk band, and but we took more from, I don't know, bands like Bow Wow Wow and The Clash and all these kind of older groups, Gang of Four, that sort of thing. But so we had very percussion, rhythmic type of thing. Our guitar player was also very percussive as well. So we had a lot of like kind of groove to us. So I was the vocalist in that, and then when that broke up, the bass player and I went on to form a band called the Eternals, which still plays today in several different forms. We're a trio, we're a 4-piece, we're a 6-piece, and a 10-piece, and they all have different music.
Yeah, that's incredible, man. What was your early punk influence?
Well, when I was a little kid, I was going to, in 6th grade, I was taking this class at a place called the Art Center, which was in a different high school than my high school. So I was taking summer classes. So I started taking summer classes. A lot of my friends who were artists were taking these summer classes. And the teacher that taught that class was like, I think you should come during the school year.
Sure.
And I was going into 8th grade, and you weren't supposed to take that class technically until you were in high school, which was 9th grade.
Sure.
And so that teacher talked to my parents and pulled some strings and got me into this art program in 8th grade. Mm-hmm. So when I started going to the art program, I was the youngest student there, and I met like seniors in high school who had started listening to like punk music.
Okay.
And it was like, it was like 92? Oh, no, sorry, 82.
Okay.
82.
Wow.
I'm old.
Yeah.
And so they were going to shows and stuff, and so at first I had them make me tapes, and I started listening to this music, and I was listening to like Kool and the Gang and stuff like that.
Of course, yeah, no doubt.
And they were hitting me with this stuff that I'd like never heard before, but I dug it. Like some of it was like, some of it I just would listen to it because I liked the name of the band or something like that. Like there's a band called The Jam. I was like, oh, The Jam. I like that. I'm gonna listen to The Jam. But I started to really like it, and so it was interesting to have these guys that were like 4 or 5 years older than I was playing me this music, and then they were going to shows, and like after my first semester of knowing those guys, I took a chance and went to the show, and me and my friends went, and we were like 14 years old, which is kind of older now than it was back then.
Sure.
Yeah. And we were going to DC, and we went to this like basement of this church where this like hardcore show was playing, and my first show was this band called Minor Threat, and Minor Threat is like super famous. Like super. I mean, they over the years they've become this iconic band. But I saw Minor Threat as my first hardcore show, and I went into the pit, which was where people danced. I'm gonna do this.
It gets intense in there, man.
Yeah, but I loved it, and the scene was so small at the time. Like it was like it was not. They weren't. There were some strangers, but they were there was a scene.
Right.
So when I first started going to see shows and you'd stage dive and blah, 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 it's the same people that you're going to see at the next show.
Right.
So people would catch you and blah, blah, blah. And even if you were strangers, and 10 years down the road when Pearl Jam videos had stage diving and stuff, that kind of changed what the whole thing was, because it would just be people that you don't know. That were just like huge mobs of people. This is like a small club with like about the size of this space. So if you were jumping off the stage, if there was like 20 people there, someone would catch you. So anyway, that was a really amazing experience as a kid, because it was a time period where I had no relationship to this. I'd never seen it, and it was also new. Like it hadn't happened before, so no one kind of knew what was going to happen. And I think I got to do it because my parents never heard of it. So if you were like, we're going to a concert, they were like, okay, a concert, sure. They don't know that people are diving off the stage. No concert. But then also my friends at the time, teenagers, we can move over there if you need to. But at the time, all my friends were just interested in music. So people weren't like drinking and doing drugs or smoking and nothing. It was just like going to go see the music. So that was another plus, because my mom met the people that were like driving us places, and they knew that all my friends were just like seeing music. So they were like, we don't know what this is, but they're not doing it.
Seems safe. No doubt.
It was actually safe, but I just gotta give them credit, like because we were like little kids going to see this stuff that no one knew what it was.
No doubt. Was it weird being a black kid going to a punk concert? Or
it was. I will say. I will say that it was weird, but it was only weird it was arguably, but not very arguably, like the best hardcore band of all time, right? So
now I gotta check them out.
All black hardcore band came from DC, right? So that was already something that existed when I was coming to shows, right? So this band, the Bad Brains, existed. All the bands that were in DC like loved the Bad Brains.
Sure.
So they were like, it's cool. It's all black band. That's amazing.
No doubt.
And so what would happen, because they also played reggae, is sometimes you go to a hardcore show and a reggae band would be playing as well.
Nice.
Or there would be a band called Scream, like the band Scream, which played hardcore music and then also played reggae too, because that had been kind of established by not only Bad Brains, but bands like The Clash and other bands that would also be interested in reggae music. And the bass player for Scream was a black guy. You know, so whether you were playing with like there were a reggae group that was in the thing, or Scream was playing, blah, blah, I saw black people at the shows, right?
Okay.
So when I walked into the club, I never felt alienated in the early DC days, but when I walked into school, I felt alienated. Because none of the black people were trying to hear about that.
Oh, for sure.
They were like, no, because in 1982, 83, 84, it was like members only and designer jeans was the thing.
Yeah.
Like, you know, before I got a mohawk, which I got like immediately.
Okay. For sure.
I had like my Theo Huxtable haircut.
Right.
You know.
Right.
My parents didn't spend a lot of money on clothes, but that was the thing that was happening. And so the switch up with an army jacket and like thrift store clothes and a mohawk and spike wristbands, that was craziness. So I think that, the truth be told, I think I established myself as being like an art guy.
Right.
Like I did a lot of drawing as a little kid, so everyone knew that I liked art. And so I think that, truth be told, they were kind of more accepting of me being kind of weird because I liked art.
Sure,
you know? But it was more difficult with my black friends of the black community for having them understand what was going on. White kids don't care.
No, they don't. They
didn't care at all.
Right.
So they were just like, what are you listening to? What is this? This crazy stuff. And the black people were kind of like, what are you doing?
Yeah, sure.
Because I still think that, like, in unusual ways, sometimes the thing, well, I guess I haven't said this before, but I feel like in terms of representation or whatever, sometimes what you do like affects everyone else. Like you're like this. Why are you dressed like that?
Yeah.
You're like, what are you doing? Like that's not how we roll. You know?
Yeah, no doubt.
So
that's a real thing.
Yeah.
And just a quick comment, like that still plays itself out. Like especially in black communities. I went to an all-black elementary school, all-black high school, and anybody that was a little different than the teenage black archetype. There was only a few that you could choose, you know. And anybody who fell outside of that was kind of looked at a little bit different. Like me being the band guy in high school, you know, I was all state my junior, senior year. I guess that's the first time that had happened in Simeon for years, probably since like the early 90s, 80s, you know. And like you, I was already kind of looked at as like the band guy. So whatever I did wasn't necessarily that much different. They didn't look at me too much different because it was already, he's the band dude. But for somebody else that maybe didn't have that type of thing, it's kind of like when you like anime now. So if you wear like a Goku jacket or something like that, or if you listen to metal music and you go to an all-black high school, even if it's diverse but it's mostly black, you're going to be looked at a little bit different and you're going to be treated a little bit different. I don't want to say alienated because that's a little strong, but you're definitely, there's a certain way that you're going to be approached. And I'm sure you can speak to that much better than I can, but you know, that's just kind of what it is. And I think, especially in the African American community, I'm sure it's like that among other races too. But with us, it's like if you're not moving with the wave that's happening that we're doing right now, it's like you're an outsider. And not only that, it's almost you're not black, which is painful to deal with. You know what I mean? Because it's like, no, I definitely am. It's definitely a thing that I identify with, because when I'm not in my community, most black people can speak to it. And it's not like a slamming some people who are not black. when you're a black person or any other person, any minority, I'm sure even white people when they go somewhere where it's not mostly white people,
which is nowhere.
Yeah, very, very true. But when you go to a community in the United States, absolutely. When you go to an area that's inherently not black, you immediately feel like an outsider. Immediately. And you almost retreat to your blackness. You try to fit into wherever you are, but you're like, oh yeah, I'm definitely a black guy. And in Chicago, I'm pretty sure it's the same way out in DC and New York, there are these pockets of very black areas, you know. And then when you leave those pockets, it's like, oh yeah, I'm definitely different. And I'm definitely not the atypical American. For whatever reason, it could just be because you're black, but you definitely feel that. Do you is that kind of what you were dealing with in high school? Do you still kind of feel that way now?
Well, what I'll say is that my parents, I feel like my parents were like first generation kind of integrational. I'm going to make up a word, man. Integrationalists, maybe.
Sure.
But I would say that they were, they grew up in Baltimore.
Sure.
And they moved to the suburbs of D.C. for work and what have you. And when I was a kid, there was we lived in a mostly white neighborhood with maybe we knew the 4 or 5 black families that were in the neighborhood. Like, we definitely knew, the Longs or the blah, blah,
yeah, no doubt.
And so if you look at the swim team picture, you can see the black people. You're like, there's the 3 people.
Right.
The Rtisan's, and there's the Locks and the Long, And so in elementary school and other things like that, that was kind of the thing that happened, right? And then by high school, there was a controversy at my high school at some point when it seemed like all the minorities in the high school were going to overtake the 50% line.
Oh,
and
shit.
So I remember some white kids' parents were concerned because if you add up all the minorities, it might be more than half of the thing. Which I was like, come on, if you add up all the Asians, Latinos, blah blah blah,
right.
I was like, that's not something to worry about.
But from our point of view, anyway. Yeah.
But I think what happened for me was because I went so into I think that punk was an opportunity for me to let go of the kind of constraints of what was expected of me.
Sure.
Right? And I think that my family had already kind of done that, or it was my personality already.
Right.
I was already just a comic book reading, sit in my house, read comic books and draw, dude.
Right.
So the finding punk music, kind of shed a little bit of the nerdiness,
right,
but took me to some other unknown world, right? And so I think what happened was, I felt like as a kid that black kids didn't totally understand me, right?
Sure.
We're a little bit like, what are you doing, right? What's going on? Why are your pants ripped up?
Right.
Why are you wearing the outfit? And then white kids were fine, except for I wasn't white.
Sure.
They didn't. There was no problem. It's just that there was that thing that where you're like, well, you're not white. I mean, that's not anything that they ever said out loud.
Right.
But I feel like I knew I was different. It wasn't like I was like, I'm at home over here because I'm the only black person here, so I'm not.
No
you know what I mean? So there was a little bit of I think growing up, there was a little bit of stress, cultural identity, that sort of thing, because taking on this kind of I can do wherever I want thing, and finding this whole other subculture that was predominantly white subculture, but in DC there was some strong black examples that said, hey, you can be here, So I did that, and it was kind of a struggle, as a youth, it was kind of a struggle, and I think that I had to work through that because after I moved to Chicago, not so much in New York, but after I moved to Chicago, I think I first moved to Wrigleyville.
Oh, wow.
When I first moved here, because I moved in with 2 people that had found an apartment.
Okay.
And so I moved in with them, and in Wrigleyville, that's when I first started to get stopped by the police for no apparent reason at nighttime.
Not a lot of black people that live in Wrigleyville.
Right. And so
this was
back in the late 80s, early 90s, right?
Yeah.
So I'm walking around, and I started to like expect if I was walking around after 2 o'clock, then a cop is going to stop me, and I didn't have a car or anything. It would just be like, whoop, whoop.
Yeah.
And I'm like carrying a jug of milk.
Right,
you know?
right,
and
right,
they're like,
right.
what are you doing? I'm like, I'm buying
Yeah.
milk. You know?
Yeah.
Like, how criminal can I be with a big jug
I'm about
of
to
milk?
vandalize somebody's car with this milk,
Yeah.
man. You better be on the watch.
So that's when I found out that I was like, I don't care. It doesn't matter how weird you look.
Right.
You know, I was like, you're still like a black person. Like, so
Sure.
that, in a weird way, I was kind of like, okay. You know, I was like, my black cred is not, if you can call it cred.
Yeah, sure.
But, you know, like, I was like, oh, I might look like a weirdo, but I'm a black
You're a
dude.
black weirdo.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
sure.
no two ways around it. But then I also was so into music that it became a history lesson for me.
Sure.
So I started buying like all kinds of black music, and I would look at as a document of a particular time period.
Absolutely.
So I always liked what was called rap music.
Sure.
From the earliest rap music, I bought the first 12-inch that I could. It was Rapper's Delight.
Was that everybody's first one? I wasn't alive then, but
Right.
that was the first hit rap song.
It was the first hit rap song, and it was the first one that was like widely distributed.
Right.
Before that, you probably would have had to be in New York and bought some small label thing.
Sure.
But I was in Maryland, and I was 12.
Right.
So I found like maybe I'm gonna just kind of diverge. just
Yeah,
for a second.
go ahead.
When Rapper's Delight came out, I love that record. Like I loved it.
Right.
Like I memorized the whole thing. I still know it today. Like I can rap the whole thing. Right.
That's impressive. That's
Yeah.
a long ass song.
It's 16 minutes long.
Yeah.
16
It's
minutes long. I had my sneakers that had roller skates attached to them.
Right.
I went to the basement and I would like roller skate around and listen to that song. And the thing is we didn't have computers, we didn't have iPods, we didn't have access to songs on our phone. You just had to wait until it came on the radio unless you bought the record.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so the magical thing is that song was 16 minutes long, and they played it on the radio regularly.
Wow.
Like it was huge. Like
Yeah.
it was a phenomenon. Right?
Yeah.
And so from that moment on, I bought whatever came out on Sugar Hill, the label.
Right.
So then I got like Apache and all these other great joints that
Right.
were around. So I followed like hip hop from the first moment I got a chance to, right? So when I got older in college, I was buying, you know, LL Cool J, Public Enemy, everything that came out.
Right.
Tribe Called Quest, you know, like I was getting all of this stuff because it was all giving me information. Not only was I going back to buy Curse Mayfield or what have you, so I
Right.
could get the history,
Right.
I was also paying attention to what was going on in the black community. And what was great about those earliest moments of NWA or Public Enemy or what have you, like you were actually hearing from black people in different places that
Totally
talk about
different experience,
experiences
yeah.
that you didn't know about.
Yes.
And I was like, holy cow,
Yeah.
this is amazing.
Yeah.
You know? And that's what made rap so kind of like important, because you were just like, this is someone telling something, you know, saying something, especially the early days before it just became like a cookie cutter, like this
Pop
is
music?
or
Yeah,
this is,
yeah.
or this is a genre to do. Like
Right.
before, gangster rap was just something that you just did
Right.
because it was a thing. People like Ice Cube were like expressing themselves really
Right.
interestingly. And Ice Cube for me also was someone that I had to learn to appreciate because I had been listening to punk music. And punk music, in many ways, was the opposite of what people thought punk music was. Punk music, most people thought punk music was really negative, but in reality, much of what punk music was doing was either being satire or being critical.
Okay.
Right? So there were some punk bands that were actually negative, but I wasn't interested in those. I was interested in those ones that were like being artistic about how they represented
Right.
the ideas. Like even some of the most famous bands, like the Sex Pistols,
Sure.
that are like they're horrible. They're running. If you actually listen to the lyrics, they're being super critical
Right.
of the society that's around them. Right. So I was interested in the punk music that was doing a similar thing, and so. I was interested in the rap music that was doing a similar thing. So when I started doing Grandmaster Flash and Furious 5,
Man, I love that movie, man.
don't push me because I'm close to the end.
Absolutely.
Like, when that happened, I was just like, this is
That's
like,
it, man.
Like that was, yeah. And on top of that, they were wearing spike wristbands and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And I was like, oh my
The
God.
leather jackets,
yeah,
man,
I was
no
like,
doubt, man.
So the whole punk thing and
Right,
the
right.
rap thing, I was like, this is amazing. This is perfect. This is for me, right? And so NWA was a group that I had to like learn to like because I was down with Public Enemy, and then
Sure.
the NWA had this like very negative type of thing, and I was like, what is going on with this group? And I think that I never actually really at the time didn't really like NWA, but then when Ice Cube separated from NWA, and then like the Bomb Squad did
Right.
production for it, I
Right.
was like, okay,
Yeah.
So I started listening to Ice Cube, and he didn't. There were some things that he said that I didn't like, but then I was like, well, maybe you don't have to like everything about art. Like maybe not everything is a pretty picture. Maybe
Right.
sometimes you can like have a problem with it,
Yeah.
but you have to think about it. Anyway, so I was saying that in terms of the thing that happened to me, in terms of being an outsider or being a weirdo,
Right.
is that I think that music, like gaining knowledge about black music across the spectrum of like, because I started to learn about jazz as well.
Sure.
So gaining that knowledge actually gave me a vast history of black people. And so I think that what I was worried about in high school and leaving high school because I was getting into punk music
Right.
was this idea of being like, am I not acting black enough, or am I doing something that like white people do, and
Right.
I'm like, am I not part of this community? The way I countered that is by listening to all the music that black people made.
Sure.
And I learned this whole history, and I learned what was going on. And then I was like, no, well, if you need to question me on my blackness, we can
Right.
talk about this.
No
because
doubt.
I don't
Absolutely.
I don't have a problem. you know?
Absolutely.
And it was that kind of study. I mean, and not only that, but when I came to the Art Institute, I also took Black Studies class,
Sure.
so the reading The Invisible Man and all these other things also buffered that. But what it really was like absorbing like black arts through through our like history.
Right. I dig that, man. One thing, we got Damon Locks here, visual artist,
Sound
recorder,
maker.
sound maker. The man does a little bit of everything. Getting back into the blackness and the validation of that through your art. One thing that I find very damaging to us as a group of individuals is that I kind of spoke about it earlier, but we so often want to squish ourselves into these few archetypes, But one thing about being an artist is that we have to take risks because we have to be honest, and a lot of times being honest is a risk. You don't know how people are going to react to it. You just don't. And you like what you like. You have to find strength in liking what you liking. You have to. There's strength in displaying what you like. You talked about the way that you dress, the spike wristbands, the tore up jeans, whatever, because that says something about you and how you want people to see you, or the culture you choose to assimilate yourself in. One thing I think that would be very positive for us as a group, is for us to continue to branch out, not just. I'm gonna stay with this line of thinking, but to continue to find other things that we like and show how diverse, continue to show how diverse we are, because we're not like monolithic. A lot of times, it's the media will put us into that sort of, most black people live in the ghetto. Most black people listen to rap. Most black girls twerk. Most of them wear weave. A lot of them use ebonics. There's that there's those very few, ways that we're portrayed anyway. I think one thing we can do to kind of tear down those ideas is for us to encourage one another to be different and not tear each other down once we decide to express those different facets of ourselves, because we're not all one thing. And one thing that I see that eats away at the underbelly of our community and individuals is they begin to resent themselves. We begin to resent each other because we do fall into these archetypes. And we see that it limits us as people. It limits our creativity. It limits the way that we think. It limits our growth. You know what I mean? So we kind of become so dissatisfied with what has become our norm. And I know this is kind of like next level thinking, but I see it playing out because I see a lot of us are too afraid to wear our natural hair because it's too black almost. You know what I mean? It's too black. It's too urban, Negro urban. You know what I mean? We don't. Man, I don't even know. We don't listen to certain types of music, as you said, because it's not black enough. So we stay in that middle lane that people can understand us in, that we can understand each other in, because there aren't a lot of us. We are kind of insulated, so to speak. You know what I mean? And it makes it very comfortable for us to be there. It's like, oh, so we can be more tribal. You know, I don't know if this is making sense, but we keep ourselves to a very specific lane, and it's very damaging, and it stifles our creativity. It also kind of gives us some sort of strength because it keeps us in a specific niche, and we kind of blossom out of that. But I think it'll hurt for a little while, but I think we could have another cultural boom once we allow ourselves to really travel outside of our norms and really challenge our own identities within America, within our community, within our socioeconomic standing, and we really start to branch out and become, I don't want to say more American because that has its own connotation within itself, but to just be more expressive. Does that make sense?
I understand exactly what you're saying. I will say a couple things. I think hair is a thing for the black community. Hair is a thing, and I think that in 2017 there's a wild diversity of hair in the black community right now.
Sure.
And I think that there has been a lot of surrounding hair in America in terms of acceptance and ideals of beauty, right? That have like defined how black people work with their hair. But I feel like in 2017, some of those ideals have been turned upside down and reconfigured. I think that hair, and specifically, is something that black people all across the world have messed with, right?
Yes.
So I think it's not as easy today to say you're afraid to wear your hair natural. I was like, because it's throughout history of the world, you look at black people's hair, and they've been doing crazy stuff with their hair.
It's wild,
forever.
Man. It's all different.
So I think that's complicated. And I also think that when we talk about like weaves or wigs or straightening and blah, 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 this is a super complicated thing that is interwoven with ideals of beauty and self-expression. Because as much as you might be like, well, straightening your hair is like because we're dealing with the white ideal, but you know, black people like flip that upside down and do crazy stuff with their hair too,
No
and
doubt.
make it twice as good.
No doubt.
But I will say that I think the ideal, I think what you're talking about is this idea of black conformity within the black community.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so I think that where that stems from, like, I'm not mad at that, even as someone that had to go through kind of an othering or feeling like an outsider for doing my own thing, because I think the history of the United States has proven that that there's this impulse for us to be kind of insular within a construct of things, because it was a mode of survival.
Sure.
So if you go way back, I've never said this before, I'm just kind of going with it, right? But if you go back to like slavery days, if you were on a plantation, there would be this structure that you're like, this is how we must behave,
Absolutely.
or the whole thing's going to come back on all of us.
Absolutely.
And we don't want you to be acting wild,
Right,
because
right.
you may not be the only person to suffer. We may all suffer for
Absolutely.
this, right? And so if you look at 2017, we're way past the slavery days, but we're not way past this kind of judgment, this kind of oppression that goes on to onto the black community. And I still feel like that the community at large still operates in this way of like, look, we need to survive this scenario.
Sure.
So here are some parameters that we put out, and if you're outside of these parameters, it can be difficult for us all. That's
Sure.
that's how I feel that comes up, and I do believe that we are expanding outward, you know, and letting. Not letting, but more people are expressing themselves. But I think that the pendulum swing of culture
Right.
back and forth changes those parameters or the constrictions of the parameters. You know, so sometimes it tightens back up because culture is acting a certain way. You
Right.
know? So I do think it's important to have many more examples, especially for young people, of what like you can be as a black person.
Sure.
For sure, 100%. But I'm empathetic with the constraints that were happening, because I think that in my younger days when I was veering out, right, doing stuff that other black kids weren't doing, I know that my parents were concerned for my safety for the most part.
Sure.
They were like, whoa, what are you doing?
Right.
You're looking crazy right
Right,
now.
right.
And I don't want you going out looking crazy. You know, like even back then when I started growing dreadlocks, that was not happening.
Sure.
Like I saw the Bad Brains and I saw Skeeter from Scream
Right.
growing dreadlocks, so I was going to grow dreadlocks. And the idea of not combing your hair
Right.
was not happening.
Sure.
In 1985, 1986, not combing your hair was not happening.
Right.
So it was not an easy thing to do. But I think that mostly it's the constraints have been like self-preservation constraints.
Sure.
But we also need to test those boundaries and test those limits. Sometimes I feel like testing boundaries are interesting. Sometimes there's some boundaries that I look at and I was like, that boundary actually needs to stay up, because what's happening here needs to go back.
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
But, you know, that's just me. Like, well, forget it.
It's all good, man. No, that's a very interesting point. I never really thought about it within that, like, survival parameters, you know, because I could see for the longest time in the country, we did have to be, and the church provided a lot of those parameters for us very early, and really up until probably very recently, that's kind of, we stayed in those particular realms for, like you say, safety, you know, for to share our ideas, you know what I mean, to come up with plans for, you know, whether it be boycotting, whether it be, you know, how we're going to raise money for things, you know, how are we going to attack this, you know, these sit-ins, organizing bus boycotts, our music, you know, a lot of our music comes out of the church, you know what I mean? I think that's where a lot of us get our initial education into music. You know, it's kind of through singing and stomping and clapping your hands. You know, like those parameters as a way of insulation against the world that wasn't really very accepting of our culture. Well, the parts of it that they didn't want anyway, you know what I mean? And just a simple, it's weird to say in 2017, but it's still true. Just a way of life, you know what I mean? Like our way of life here, you know. So I could see where those safety parameters and where veering out of it makes the whole weaker. So if we have too many people doing non-black things, it kind of weakens the whole. And I never really thought about it that way, but that's a very, very good point. I'm going to cut it off right here. We're going to have to make a part 2. We've been going at it for an hour almost, man. We're going to take a break. I got Damon Locks with me, multimedia artist. He does everything. We're going to get into what he's doing next, and we're going to talk about his artwork coming up in the future.